There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary: a Tuesday night, a half-empty mug of tea, the low hum of the refrigerator. They were the camouflage of the mundane, and you don't realize their weight until much later, when you look back and see them for what they were: the subtle shifting of tectonic plates, the quiet turning of a key in a lock you never knew was there. For me, that moment smelled like rain-damp cotton and the specific, clean scent of Liam's shampoo. It was the night the architecture of my life was fundamentally and irrevocably altered, not with a crash or a demolition, but with a whisper of movement, a settling of foundations into a place I had only ever allowed myself to visit in dreams. It was the first time he held me when I broke, and in doing so, he unknowingly began the long, patient process of putting me back together. He was asleep, or at least pretending to be, his breathing a slow, rhythmic current against the back of my neck. I was facing the wall, my body a rigid line of feigned indifference, every muscle coiled with the effort of not moving, not breathing too loudly, not giving away the frantic symphony playing out inside my chest. He had ended up in my bed under the most plausible of deniability, a story of a lumpy couch and an aching back that we both accepted at face value because the alternative was too terrifying to voice. His arm was draped loosely over my waist, a casual, possessive weight that felt both like an anchor and a brand. In the years of our friendship, we had shared everything: secrets, fears, last slices of pizza, the cramped space of a two-man tent, but we had never shared this strange, charged stillness in the dark, where the silence was so loud it seemed to have a physical presence, a texture. I remember thinking, with a clarity that felt like a shard of glass in my gut, that if this was all I ever got, this one night of accidental, unspoken intimacy, I would have to find a way to make it be enough. But a part of me, a foolish, hopeful, treacherous part, knew it was already too late for that. This was not an ending. It was a beginning, and it was going to destroy me. To understand the significance of that night, the sheer, earth-shattering gravity of his arm around my waist, you would have to understand the landscape that came before it. You would have to know Liam, and you would have to know the carefully constructed, hermetically sealed world I had built around my feelings for him. We met in the way so many people do in college, thrown together by a shared endeavor that demanded proximity and forged a bond out of exhaustion and chlorine. We were on the swim team. Liam was the star, the sprinter, a beautiful, chaotic explosion of power and energy in the water. He moved with a kind of unthinking grace, all sharp angles and fluid motion, his laughter echoing off the tiled walls of the natatorium, a sound that always seemed to fill whatever space he was in. He collected friends like other people collected loose change, effortlessly, his charm a magnetic field that pulled everyone into his orbit. He was sunshine and noise, and the feeling of breaking the surface of the water for a gasping, life-affirming breath. I was the opposite, a distance swimmer. My world was the quiet, monotonous rhythm of the long haul, the metronomic pull and push of my own body through the water, the muffled silence beneath the surface. I was a creature of observation, more comfortable behind the lens of my camera than in the center of a room. I documented life. I rarely felt like I was fully participating in it. My photographs were my language, a way of framing the world, of capturing the fleeting expressions and unnoticed details that told the real story. I saw things. I saw the way Liam's smile didn't always reach his eyes, the subtle tension in his shoulders when he thought no one was looking, the flicker of loneliness in his gaze when he was surrounded by a crowd of his own making. I saw the boy underneath the golden boy exterior, and from the very beginning, I was a goner. It was a quiet, hopeless kind of fall, like slipping into deep water without a splash. Our friendship grew in the spaces between things, in the shared exhaustion after a grueling practice, the long bus rides to away meets, the late-night study sessions fueled by bad coffee, and a mutual sense of impending doom. He was a software engineering major, his world one of logic and code, of elegant solutions to complex problems. I was a fine arts major, my world one of light and shadow, of finding meaning in the abstract. We shouldn't have fit, but we did. He would explain the beauty of a perfectly written algorithm, and I would try to explain the emotional weight of a certain shade of blue. He seemed to appreciate my quiet. He once told me, sprawled out on the floor of my dorm room looking at contact sheets, that being with me was like turning the volume down. He said it wasn't that I was boring, but that the world was so loud all the time, and I was a pocket of silence where he could actually hear himself think. I held on to that phrase for years, turning it over and over in my mind like a smooth, worn stone. A pocket of silence. I was his refuge, his quiet harbor. It was a role I cherished, even as it chafed against the much larger, more tumultuous feelings I kept locked away. For 4 years, this was our rhythm. Liam would burn bright and fast, dating a succession of girls who were as bright and shiny as he was, while I remained on the periphery, the steady, reliable friend, the confidant, the one he came to when things went wrong. I listened to him talk about Sarah, his longest and most serious girlfriend, a smart, ambitious pre-med student who seemed, on the surface, to be his perfect match. I learned to school my features into a mask of friendly neutrality, to offer advice that was helpful but not too helpful, to swallow the bitter taste of jealousy that rose in my throat whenever he said her name. I became an expert in the art of self-containment, building walls within myself, rooms where my true feelings were kept under lock and key. My camera became my only outlet, the only place I could be honest. I have hundreds of photos of him from that time, candid shots where he's laughing, or studying, or just staring off into space. They are, I think, the most honest love letters ever written, seen only by me, developed in the chemical bath of a darkroom that felt as secret and sacred as a confessional. After graduation, we ended up in the same city, a happy accident of job offers and geographic convenience. We rented apartments in the same sprawling, anonymous complex, separated by 2 floors and a world of unspoken things. Our friendship, freed from the structured environment of college, deepened. It became something more adult, more essential. We were each other's constant in a new city that felt vast and indifferent. He was my emergency contact. I had a key to his apartment. We fell into a comfortable domesticity that was entirely platonic. We cooked dinner together on Thursdays, watched terrible movies on Sundays, and navigated the bewildering landscape of our early 20s side by side. He was the first person I called when my grandfather passed away, and his was the first face I saw when I opened my door, his expression so full of quiet, unpitying sympathy that I finally allowed myself to cry. He just stood there, a solid presence in the doorway, and let me. He didn't offer platitudes or try to fix it. He just was. That was his gift. His presence was a statement in itself. And I continued to love him, quietly, patiently, hopelessly. It was a low, constant hum beneath the surface of my life, a fact as immutable as my own heartbeat. I had long ago accepted it as a permanent part of my internal geography, a vast, lonely ocean I had learned to navigate. I never expected to make landfall, to risk our friendship, the most stable and important relationship in my life, for the vanishingly small possibility that he might feel the same way. It was unthinkable. It would have been like setting fire to my own home in the hopes of being rescued. So I stayed silent. I watched him build a life with Sarah. I attended their housewarming party. I listened to him talk about their future. And I perfected the art of being the supportive friend, the quiet observer, the keeper of a love that was destined to live and die in the silent chambers of my own heart. I was content, or so I told myself. I had his friendship, and that was a rare and precious thing. It had to be enough. The shift, when it came, was not a gradual erosion but a sudden, violent tremor. It began, as so many seismic events do, with a phone call late on a Wednesday night. I was working in my makeshift darkroom, the red light casting an infernal glow on the trays of chemicals, my hands moving with practiced familiarity. When my phone buzzed, I almost ignored it, annoyed at the intrusion into my sanctuary. But it was Liam. He never called this late unless it was important. I wiped my hands and answered, a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Ethan. His voice was hollow, stripped of its usual warmth and energy. It was a voice I had only heard a handful of times, a voice that signaled a crack in his carefully maintained armor. Liam? What's wrong? Are you okay? There was a long pause on the other end, filled with a ragged, unsteady breath. It's over, he said, the words small and brittle. Sarah and me. It's over. I didn't know what to say. The usual platitudes felt cheap and insulting. My first instinct, the one that shot through me with a shameful, electric thrill, was a surge of something that felt terrifyingly like hope. I crushed it instantly, burying it under a wave of guilt. My best friend was hurting. That was all that mattered. I focused on that, clinging to it like a life raft. Where are you? I asked, my voice steady, practical. The photographer in me taking over, framing the situation, looking for the right angle. I don't know, he whispered. I'm just driving. I can't go back to the apartment. Her stuff is everywhere. I can't. His voice broke. It was the sound of a dam crumbling, of a structure that had been under immense pressure for a long time finally giving way. Come here, I said, the words leaving my mouth before I had even fully formed the thought. It was pure instinct. Just come to my place. Don't think about it. Just drive here. Another pause, longer this time. I could hear the faint whoosh of cars in the background. Yeah, he said finally, his voice thick. Okay, yeah, I'll be there soon. When I opened the door 20 minutes later, he looked like a shipwreck. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes red-rimmed and unfocused. He was wearing a rumpled t-shirt and jeans, and he was holding his keys so tightly his knuckles were white. He looked lost, like a child who had wandered away from his parents in a crowded store. He just stood on my welcome mat, swaying slightly, as if the ground beneath him was unstable. Without a word, I stepped aside and held the door open. He walked past me into the living room and sank onto my couch, dropping his head into his hands. The silence that followed was heavy, weighted with all the things he couldn't say. I didn't push. I just went to the kitchen, filled a glass with water, and set it on the coffee table in front of him. Then I sat in the armchair opposite, and I waited. I let the silence be. I gave him the one thing I knew he needed, the thing he had once said only I could provide, a pocket of quiet in a world that had suddenly become too loud. He didn't talk for almost an hour. He just sat there, his shoulders shaking intermittently. I watched the slow, steady drip of condensation trail down the side of the water glass. I watched the way the streetlights cast long, distorted shadows across my living room floor. I cataloged the details, a defense mechanism against the overwhelming urge to go to him, to wrap my arms around him, to tell him everything would be okay. But I knew that wasn't what he needed from me. He didn't need a savior. He just needed a witness. Finally, he lifted his head, his eyes finding mine across the dimly lit room. She said she hasn't been happy for a year, he said, his voice a raw whisper. A year, Ethan, and I never even saw it. How could I not see it? It was a question without an answer, a cry of bewildered pain. And so began the slow, painful excavation of a dead relationship. He talked for hours, the words pouring out of him in a torrent of grief and confusion and self-recrimination. He talked about the little signs he had missed, the silences that had grown longer, the casual touches that had disappeared. He talked about their plans, the future they had mapped out that was now just a phantom limb, an ache where something used to be. I listened. I didn't interrupt, didn't offer solutions. I just listened, providing the occasional murmur of assent, letting him know he was being heard. I was the container for his grief, the steady, unmoving shoreline against which his waves of pain could crash. It was the role I had always played, but tonight it felt different, more intense, more vital. Sometime after 3 a.m, his words finally petered out, his energy spent. He looked utterly drained, his body slumped against the cushions, his eyes glassy with exhaustion. You should try to get some sleep, I said softly. He nodded numbly, but made no move to get up. He looked at the front door as if it were the entrance to a hostile, alien world. I can't go home, he said again, his voice small. I can't. You're not going home, I said, my tone leaving no room for argument. You're staying here. The couch is yours. He looked at me, and for the first time that night, a flicker of his old self surfaced in his eyes, a glimmer of gratitude that was so profound it almost buckled my knees. "Thanks, Ethan," he murmured. "I don't know what I'd do." He trailed off, too tired to finish the sentence. I got up and pulled a spare blanket and a pillow from the hall closet. I arranged them on the couch, my movements efficient and detached. I was on autopilot, my body performing the necessary actions while my mind raced. He was here. He was staying. A part of me, the part one kept locked away, was buzzing with a dangerous, illicit energy. I stamped it down fiercely. He was my friend. He was broken, and I was his safe harbor. That was the beginning and the end of it. "Try to rest," I said, turning to go to my bedroom. "Ethan." I stopped in the doorway, my back to him. "Don't close the door." The request was so quiet, so vulnerable. It felt like a physical blow. It was the plea of a child afraid of the dark, afraid of being alone with the monsters under the bed. My heart ached for him. "Okay," I whispered to the empty hallway. "I won't." And I left the door to my bedroom open a crack, a silent testament to my vigil. I lay in my own bed, staring at the sliver of living room light cutting across my ceiling, listening to the sound of his restless turning on the couch. I didn't sleep at all that night. I just listened, standing guard over his fractured peace. This was the shift. The ground had cracked open, and a new, uncertain landscape was beginning to form. That one night bled into 2, then 3. The first few days were a blur of takeout containers, hushed conversations, and long, desolate silences. Liam moved through my apartment like a ghost, his presence both enormous and barely there. He would go to work, his face a carefully constructed mask of normalcy, and then return in the evening to my quiet space, the mask crumbling the moment he stepped through the door. He was avoiding his own apartment, the place that had been a home and was now a museum of a failed life. He said he would deal with it on the weekend, when he had the strength. I didn't push. I just let him be. And every night, he would fall into an exhausted sleep on my couch, and every night, I would leave my bedroom door ajar. This became our new, unspoken routine, a fragile ecosystem we built in the wreckage of his old life. It was a strange, temporary domesticity, and I found myself navigating it with a hypervigilant awareness. I was intensely conscious of his presence in my space. The way his jacket was slung over the back of a dining chair, the scent of his soap lingering in the bathroom after his morning shower, the extra pair of shoes by the door. My apartment, once solely my own sanctuary, now held the echo of him in every room. It was both wonderful and agonizing. I was living in a state of suspended reality, a what-if scenario playing out in real time. And I knew, with a certainty that was a cold, hard knot in my stomach, that it was temporary. Sooner or later, he would heal. He would move on. He would leave. And my apartment would feel impossibly empty, the silence he once craved now a screaming void. The ritual began on the 4th night. I came out of the bathroom after brushing my teeth to find him standing in the middle of the living room, staring at the couch with a look of profound dread. He was rubbing the back of his neck, a telltale sign of his stress. "What's up?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. He grimaced. "Your couch is not designed for human sleep," he said, trying for a light-hearted tone that didn't quite land. "My back is killing me." I felt a strange, electric jolt shoot through me, a mixture of panic and something else I refused to name. I saw the path unfolding before me, the logical, obvious solution, and my mind screamed at me to turn back. But my mouth had other ideas. "You can take my bed," I offered. "I'll take the couch. I can sleep anywhere." It was a lie. I was a terrible sleeper, prone to insomnia at the best of times. But it was the correct, friendly thing to say. He shook his head immediately, a flush creeping up his neck. "No, man, I can't kick you out of your own bed." "That's ridiculous." He paused, looking away, at the floor, at the wall, anywhere but at me. "It's a big bed, though," he said, the words quiet, almost an afterthought. We've shared worse, on swim trips. The air in the room seemed to thin, to crackle with a sudden, intense pressure. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. This was it. The moment where the line, once so clear and defined, began to blur into an indistinct haze. He was offering a reason, a justification rooted in our shared past, a piece of plausible deniability that we could both cling to. It was just practical. It was just about getting a decent night's sleep. It meant nothing. Except it meant everything. I swallowed, my throat suddenly dry. Yeah, I heard myself say, my voice sounding distant and unfamiliar. Okay. If you want, the relief on his face was so immediate, so palpable, that it almost made me forget the terror coiling in my own stomach. Thanks, Ethan, he said, and it sounded like he truly meant it. He disappeared into the bathroom, and I was left standing in the living room, my mind reeling. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, the wind pulling at me, the drop both terrifying and strangely alluring. I walked into my bedroom in a daze. I got into my side of the bed, the side closest to the wall, and pulled the covers up to my chin. I lay there, rigid, my eyes fixed on the ceiling, listening to the sound of him brushing his teeth in the bathroom. This was a mistake. A catastrophic, world-altering mistake. When he came into the room, he moved with a hesitant quiet. The lights were off, the only illumination coming from the sliver of moonlight filtering through the blinds. He didn't speak as he slid into the other side of the bed, the mattress dipping with his weight. He kept a careful, deliberate distance between us, a buffer zone of empty space. But it was a futile gesture. I was acutely aware of him in a way that transcended physical proximity. I could feel the heat radiating from his body across the small gap. I could hear the soft rustle of the sheets as he settled. I could smell the mint of his toothpaste. The air was thick with unspoken words, with the sheer, overwhelming fact of his presence in my bed. We lay there for what felt like an eternity, two separate islands in a sea of white cotton, both of us pretending to be on the verge of sleep. My entire being was focused on the simple, agonizing act of breathing normally. In, out, a metronome against the chaos in my head. I was so consumed with my own internal monologue, with the effort of appearing calm, that I almost didn't notice when he shifted. It was a small movement, a slight roll onto his side, facing me. I kept my own back to him, my eyes squeezed shut. Then I felt it, a tentative, hesitant touch, his hand resting lightly on my hip. It was a feather-light pressure, almost imperceptible, but it sent a shock wave through my entire system. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. What is this? What does this mean? My mind was a frantic cacophony of questions. Is he asleep? Did he do it unconsciously? Is this a test? Is this a mistake? And then his arm moved again, sliding from my hip to settle around my waist, pulling me back against him with a gentle, inexorable pressure until my back was flush against his chest. His chin came to rest on my shoulder, and he let out a long, slow sigh, a sound of such profound, bone-deep weariness that it cut through my panic. He was seeking comfort. That was all. He was a drowning man clinging to a piece of driftwood. And I was the driftwood. The realization didn't lessen the frantic beating of my heart, but it shifted its quality from terror to a deep, aching tenderness. He was hurting, and he was turning to me, in the dark, in the silence, for some small measure of solace. So I did the only thing I could do. I stayed perfectly still. I let him hold me. I matched my breathing to his, a slow, steady rhythm, until the distinction between his breath and mine began to blur. I lay there for hours, suspended in that strange, new reality, the weight of his arm around me a grounding force, the warmth of his body a silent comfort. And sometime in the deep, dark hours of the morning, surrounded by the scent of him, feeling the slow, steady beat of his heart against my back, I finally fell asleep. This became the ritual. The pretense of the couch was abandoned after that first night. There was no discussion, no acknowledgement of the change. It simply became the new normal. He would finish his shower, I would finish whatever I was doing, and we would wordlessly go to my bedroom. He would take his side, I would take mine. And every night, after a few minutes of feigned settling, he would roll over and pull me against him. Sometimes he would be the big spoon, his arm a secure weight around my waist, his face buried in my hair. Other times, he would face me, tucking my head under his chin, his arms wrapped around my shoulders, holding me as if he were protecting me from some unseen threat. It was a chaste, desperate kind of intimacy, born of his grief and my silent, hopeless love. I lived for those nights, and I dreaded them in equal measure. My days became a waiting game, a long, drawn-out period of anticipation for the moment when the lights would go out and the silence of the room would allow for this strange, unspoken permission. I was an addict, and his proximity was my drug. I learned the topography of his body, the way his collarbone felt beneath my cheek, the rhythm of his breathing as he drifted off to sleep, the surprising softness of the hair on his arms. I became a scholar of his unconscious gestures, the way his fingers would sometimes twitch against my stomach, the low murmur he would make in the depths of a dream. My senses were heightened to an almost painful degree. The world outside that bedroom, outside that small, sacred space we created each night, seemed to fade, to become muted and unimportant. But during the day, the ambiguity was a constant, low-grade torture. We would wake up in the morning, tangled together, his leg thrown over mine, my hand resting on his chest. And for a few blissful, hazy seconds, it would feel real. Then, awareness would dawn, and a subtle, awkward tension would fill the space between us. He would pull away first, always, mumbling something about the time or needing coffee. He would move about the apartment with a determinately casual air, as if we were just roommates, as if he hadn't spent the entire night holding me like I was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to liquid. We never spoke of it. Not once. The nights were a secret, a shared dream that we both pretended to forget upon waking. I analyzed every word, every gesture, every flicker of an expression, searching for meaning. I was a detective in a case with no clues, a cryptographer trying to decipher a code that was likely just random noise. Was this just about his breakup? Was I just a warm body, a convenient, human-shaped security blanket? Or was there something more? Was it possible, was it even remotely conceivable, that in reaching for me for comfort, he was discovering something else? The hope was a dangerous, seductive poison. I tried to suppress it, to remind myself of the context, of his heartbreak, of our long-standing platonic friendship. But it was a stubborn, resilient thing, that hope. It took root in the dark, nourished by the warmth of his body against mine, and it began to grow, wild and untamed, in the carefully tended garden of my self-control. This went on for 3 weeks. 3 weeks of chaste nights and confusing days. 3 weeks of me walking a tightrope of emotion, balanced precariously between a quiet, profound joy and a deep, gnawing anxiety. He started to seem more like himself during the day. The hollow look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by flashes of his old humor. He started talking about the future again, not in the grand, sweeping terms he had with Sarah, but in small ways. He talked about a new project at work, a hiking trip he wanted to take in the fall. He was healing, and with every sign of his recovery, a cold dread washed over me. Because his healing meant the end of this. It meant he would soon be strong enough to go back to his own apartment, his own bed. The ritual would end, and I would be left alone in my room, the sheets holding the ghost of his scent, the silence no longer a comfort, but an accusation. The thought was unbearable. I had been given a glimpse of a life I had never allowed myself to want, and I knew, with a terrible certainty, that having it taken away would be 1,000 times worse than never having had it at all. He had broken, and I had been there to hold him. But I was beginning to realize that I was breaking, too, in a much quieter, more insidious way. I was fracturing under the weight of all the things I couldn't say, all the feelings I had to keep hidden behind a mask of patient friendship. The pocket of silence I had once provided for him had become my own personal prison. The crossing happened on a Saturday. It had been a good day, the kind of deceptively normal day that gives no hint of the earthquake to come. We had gone for a run in the morning, the air crisp and cool, and fallen into our old, easy rhythm, our strides matching, our conversation light. Later, we had deep cleaned my apartment, a burst of shared domestic energy, with music playing and windows open to the afternoon sun. It felt comfortable. It felt real. For a few hours, I allowed myself to believe in the fantasy, to pretend that this was just our life, simple and shared. That evening, we ordered a pizza and sat on the floor of the living room to eat it, watching some mindless action movie. The atmosphere was relaxed, the easiest it had been since his breakup. He was laughing, a real, genuine laugh that reached his eyes and made my chest ache with a familiar pang of affection. After the movie ended, we just sat in the comfortable silence, the credits rolling on the screen, the empty pizza box between us. "I should probably go deal with my apartment tomorrow," he said quietly, his voice breaking the spell. There it was, the beginning of the end. A cold fist clenched in my stomach. I tried to keep my voice even. "Yeah? You think you're ready?" He shrugged, not looking at me. "I don't know if I'll ever be ready, but I can't hide out at your place forever. It's not fair to you. It's not a problem, Liam," I said, and I meant it. "You can stay as long as you need." The words felt inadequate, a pale imitation of the desperate plea screaming in my head. "Please don't go." He finally turned to look at me, his expression unreadable in the flickering blue light of the television screen. His gaze was intense, searching. It felt as if he was seeing me for the first time, really seeing me, not just as his friend, his refuge, but as something else. The air grew thick again, charged with that familiar, terrifying energy. "Ethan," he said, his voice barely a whisper. My heart started that frantic, familiar rhythm. "Yeah." He hesitated, his throat working. He seemed to be having an internal battle, his brow furrowed in concentration. He opened his mouth to speak, then closed it again. I waited, holding my breath, my entire universe narrowing to the space between us on my living room floor. "Thank you," he said finally. It wasn't what I had expected. For everything. For letting me stay. For not pushing. For just being here, of course, I managed to say, my throat tight. "That's what friends are for." The word friends hung in the air between us, suddenly feeling like a lie. A flimsy, inadequate label for whatever this had become. He held my gaze for a long moment, and then he did something that shattered the fragile composure I had so carefully maintained. He reached out, his hand coming up to cup my jaw, his thumb stroking gently along my cheekbone. His touch was electric, a jolt that seemed to travel straight to the core of my being. It was not the casual, unconscious touch of our nights. This was deliberate. This was intentional. This was a question. I didn't move. I couldn't. I was paralyzed, caught in the tractor beam of his gaze, my mind a complete and total blank. All the analysis, all the fear, all the carefully constructed walls, they all just dissolved into nothing, leaving only the raw, overwhelming reality of his touch. He leaned in slowly, his eyes never leaving mine, giving me every opportunity to pull away, to stop him, to break the spell. But I was rooted to the spot, a willing statue. My entire life, it seemed, had been leading to this single, terrifying, beautiful moment. "Would it be okay?" he whispered, his lips inches from mine. The question was so soft, so full of a vulnerability I had never seen in him before, that it broke my heart a little. He wasn't the confident, charming Liam of popular perception. He was just a man, uncertain and afraid, asking for permission to cross a line he seemed to understand was irreversible. I couldn't find my voice. I could only manage a small, almost imperceptible nod. And that was all the answer he needed. He closed the small distance between us, and his lips met mine. It wasn't a passionate, movie-style kiss. It was hesitant. It was gentle. It was unbelievably soft. It was a question, a confession, and an apology all at once. It tasted of salt and regret and a tentative, burgeoning hope. It was, without a doubt, the single most terrifying and wonderful thing I had ever experienced. I felt a tremor run through his hand where it rested on my face, and I realized with a jolt that he was just as scared as I was. That knowledge, more than the kiss itself, was what finally broke through my paralysis. I lifted my own shaky hand and placed it over his, a silent answer to his unspoken question. "Yes, this is okay." The kiss ended as gently as it began. He pulled back slowly, his forehead coming to rest against mine. We stayed like that for a long moment, breathing the same air, our eyes closed. The silence that followed was different from all the silences that had come before. It wasn't empty or awkward. It was full. It was heavy with the weight of a door that had just been opened, a door I never thought I would even find, let alone walk through. Okay, he breathed out, a single, shaky word. Okay, I whispered back. And in the quiet of my living room, with the credits of a forgotten movie still rolling on the screen, the world shifted on its axis. The tectonic plates had finally settled into their new formation. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if this was a happy ending or the beginning of a new kind of pain. All I knew was that something had been irrevocably broken, and something new and terrifyingly fragile had just been built in its place. The aftermath was not the gentle unfolding I had foolishly, naively hoped for. It was a retreat, a full-scale, panicked withdrawal. The morning after the kiss was a masterpiece of avoidance. Liam was up before me, a first. When I came into the kitchen, he was already dressed, nursing a mug of coffee, his back to me as he stared out the window. The easy intimacy of our shared mornings was gone, replaced by a stiff, brittle formality. "Morning," he said, without turning around. His voice was tight, strained. "Hey," I replied, my own voice cautious. I felt like I was navigating a minefield. One wrong step, one wrong word, and everything could detonate. I poured myself a coffee, the silence stretching between us, thin and taut like a wire. The air was thick with the memory of the kiss, a ghost that sat at the kitchen table with us. He drained his mug in one quick swallow and set it in the sink with a clatter that made me jump. "I'm gonna head over to my place," he announced to the faucet. "Start sorting through things. Probably be there most of the day." "Oh, okay," my heart sank. He was running. Do you want any help?" "No," he said, too quickly. "No, I'm good. It's something I need to do on my own." He finally turned to face me, but he wouldn't meet my eyes. His gaze was fixed on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. I'll grab my stuff later." His stuff. The jacket on the chair, the extra toothbrush in the bathroom, the small collection of belongings that had woven him into the fabric of my home. He was severing the ties. He was erasing himself from my space. The message was brutally clear. Last night was a mistake. He was gone a minute later, leaving me alone in the sun-drenched kitchen, the silence he left behind a deafening roar. I felt hollowed out, a fragile shell. The hope that had bloomed so brightly the night before had withered into a sick, cold dread. I had been wrong. I had misread everything. He hadn't been discovering new feelings for me. He had just been lost and lonely and confused, and I had been a convenient port in a storm. The kiss hadn't been a beginning. It had been an aberration, a moment of grief-induced madness that he now deeply regretted. The day was one of the longest of my life. I wandered through my apartment, which now felt cavernous and empty. Every object seemed to mock me. The couch where he had first slept, the spot on the living room floor where he had kissed me, the bed that still held the faint, fading scent of him. I felt like a fool, a naive, pathetic fool who had mistaken a cry for help for a declaration of love. The pain was a physical thing, a dull, heavy ache in the center of my chest. It was the familiar pain of unrequited love, but magnified, sharpened by the cruelty of that one brief, beautiful moment of hope. He didn't come back that night. He sent a text around 10 o'clock, a sterile, impersonal message. "Hey, staying at my place tonight. Got a lot done. Talk tomorrow. Talk tomorrow." The words were a promise and a threat. I lay in my bed, alone for the first time in 3 weeks, and the emptiness was a vast, cold ocean. I felt the absence of his weight beside me, the lack of his warmth at my back. The silence of the room was absolute, and I had never felt more alone. The ritual was broken. The spell was shattered, and I was left to pick up the pieces of my own stupid, hopeful heart. The next few days were a special kind of hell. He was distant, polite, a ghost of the friend he had once been. We exchanged brief, functional texts. We avoided each other at the apartment complex. The easy camaraderie that had been the bedrock of our relationship for years had vanished, replaced by a chasm of awkward, unspoken tension. He was trying to erase what had happened, to rewind time to before that night, to put us back into the neat, safe boxes of best friends, but he couldn't. He had opened Pandora's box, and now the air was filled with questions and feelings that refused to be put back inside. I was hurt, but beneath the hurt, a slow-burning anger began to smolder. It wasn't fair. He had been the one to initiate everything. He had been the one who couldn't sleep on the couch. He had been the one to reach for me in the dark, night after night. He had been the one who leaned in, who asked permission, who kissed me. And now he was treating me like I was the source of the problem, a complication to be managed and avoided. The quiet observer in me had had enough. I couldn't live in this limbo, this purgatory of ambiguity. I needed to know. Even if the truth was the worst thing I could imagine, it had to be better than this suffocating silence. I waited until Wednesday. For days after the kiss. For days of him treating me like a polite stranger. I saw his car pull into the parking lot after work, and I knew it was now or never. I took a deep breath, my heart pounding a nervous rhythm against my ribs, and I went downstairs and knocked on his door. It felt strange to be knocking on a door that I usually had a key for. He opened it, and his face fell when he saw me. He actually looked disappointed. The sight of it sent a fresh stab of pain through me, but it also solidified my resolve. "Hey," he said, his voice flat. He made no move to invite me in, standing in the doorway, blocking my path. "We need to talk, Liam," I said, my own voice stronger and steadier than I felt. He sighed, a weary, put-upon sound, and ran a hand through his hair. "Ethan, I'm really tired. Can we do this another time?" "No," I said, the word sharp, uncompromising. "We can't. We're doing this now." Something in my tone must have gotten through to him. The exhaustion in his eyes was replaced by a flicker of apprehension. He finally stepped back, letting me into the apartment. It was chaos. Boxes were everywhere, half-packed, half-unpacked. Sarah's presence had been mostly erased, but the space felt wounded, unsettled. It was a perfect reflection of his own internal state. He didn't offer me a seat. He just leaned against the kitchen counter, crossing his arms over his chest, a defensive, closed-off posture. "What's up?" he asked, as if he had no idea. I took a deep breath, gathering my courage. "I want to know what's going on," I said, keeping my voice level. "With you. With us. You can't just kiss me, Liam, and then pretend I don't exist for 4 days. You don't get to do that." He flinched at the word kiss, as if it were a physical blow. He looked away, staring at a stack of boxes. "I know," he mumbled. "I'm sorry. I've been a jerk. I don't need an apology," I said, my frustration rising. "I need an explanation. What was that? What did it mean? And why are you acting like you can't stand to be in the same room with me now?" He was silent for a long time, his jaw tight. I could see the conflict raging in his eyes. He looked trapped, cornered. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and ragged. "I don't know what it was, okay? I don't know. I was messed up. My life had just fallen apart. You were there. I was lonely, and I screwed everything up. I crossed a line. I never should have done it, and I'm sorry I put you in that position." The words were like a punch to the gut. Every single one of my worst fears, confirmed. I was a moment of weakness, a port in a storm, a mistake. I felt the anger drain out of me, replaced by a vast, empty sadness. I had gambled on hope, and I had lost. "So that's all it was?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You were just lonely?" "I don't know," he exploded, his voice cracking with a sudden, raw emotion that surprised both of us. He pushed himself off the counter, pacing the small, cluttered space between us. "I don't know what it was. I don't know what I'm doing, Ethan. Everything is a mess. My whole life, I've had this plan, you know? The job, the girlfriend, the house, the future. And it all just disappeared. And then there was you." He stopped pacing and looked at me, his eyes wide and desperate. "Being at your place, it was the only time in weeks that I felt safe, calm. And being with you, sleeping next to you, it felt right. It felt more right than anything has felt in a very long time. And that scares the hell out of me." The confession hung in the air, raw and shimmering. This was it. The truth. Not the simple, dismissive excuse I had feared, but something far more complicated, more terrifying, and more hopeful. "Why does it scare you?" I asked softly, my own anger forgotten, replaced by a wave of empathy for the confused, frightened man standing in front of me. "Because it's not part of the plan," he said, his voice rising again in frustration. "You're not part of the plan. You're my best friend. You're Ethan. It's not supposed to be like this. I'm not. I'm not supposed to feel this way about you," he finally said it. The words he had been running from for days. "Feel this way about you." My breath caught in my throat. It was real. I hadn't imagined it. It wasn't just his grief. It was something more. Something he couldn't understand or accept. I took a step towards him, closing the distance between us. "Liam," I said, my voice gentle. "There is no plan. There's just life. And it's messy, and it's confusing, and it doesn't follow any rules. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to be confused. But it's not okay to push me away because of it. That's not fair to me. And it's not fair to you." He looked at me, his defenses finally crumbling. The anger and confusion in his eyes softened, replaced by a profound, heartbreaking vulnerability. He looked like that same lost kid who had shown up on my doorstep weeks ago. "I've been in love with you for years," I said, the words tumbling out, quiet and simple and true. There was no point in hiding anymore. The secret had been exposed, and the only path forward was through honesty. I never said anything because our friendship was too important to me to risk. I was happy just being your friend. But then all of this happened, and I let myself hope. And then you pulled away, and it felt like I was losing you twice. As a friend, and as something else, tears welled in his eyes, and he didn't bother to wipe them away. "I'm so sorry, Ethan," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so scared of screwing this up. Of screwing us up. You're the most important person in my life. The idea of losing you. I can't handle it. You won't lose me," I said, my voice firm. "But you have to stop running. From this. From me. We can figure this out. But we have to do it together." He just stared at me for a long moment, the tears tracing silent paths down his cheeks. And then he closed the remaining space between us and wrapped his arms around me, pulling me into a fierce, desperate hug. He buried his face in my shoulder, and I felt his body shake with a silent sob. I wrapped my own arms around him, holding him tightly, my cheek pressed against his hair. It wasn't a romantic embrace. It was something more fundamental. It was two people, lost and scared, clinging to each other in the wreckage. "I don't know what to do," he mumbled into my shirt. "I know," I whispered back, my own eyes burning. "That's okay. We'll start with this." And we just stood there, in the middle of his half-empty apartment, holding on. The confrontation hadn't solved everything. It hadn't magically erased his fear or my hurt. But it had broken the silence. It had brought us back to each other. And for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of that stubborn, resilient hope return. We were a mess. But we were a mess together. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The resolution wasn't a sudden, cinematic moment. It was a slow, quiet rebuilding. It was a series of small, intentional choices made every day. We didn't fall into a whirlwind romance. Instead, we started over. We learned a new language, one that was built on the honesty we had finally found in the wreckage of his apartment. We talked, really talked, for hours, about his confusion, my years of silence, our fears for what this new, undefined thing between us might become. It was clumsy and awkward at times, like learning to walk again after a long illness, but it was real. He didn't move back into my apartment. He stayed in his own, and we began the strange, tentative dance of dating. He would come over for dinner, and at the end of the night, he would kiss me at the door, a soft, questioning kiss, and then he would go home. It was important, he said, for him to learn how to be alone, to stand on his own 2 feet without using me as a crutch, either for his grief or for his confusion. I understood, and I respected him for it. It proved that what was growing between us wasn't just born of need, but of a genuine, developing choice. Slowly, the fear in his eyes was replaced by a quiet certainty. The awkwardness between us melted away, replaced by a new kind of intimacy, one that was deeper and more profound than the desperate, unconscious comfort-seeking of those first few weeks. It was an intimacy built on shared vulnerability. I would watch him from across the room, and he would catch my eye and smile, a real, unguarded smile, and my heart would do a slow, steady roll in my chest. It was a feeling not of frantic hope, but of a peaceful, grounding joy. About a month after our conversation, he showed up at my door late on a Friday night with a duffel bag and a pizza. "My couch still sucks," he said, a shy grin playing on his lips. "Mind if I stay over?" I smiled back. "I think I can make room for you." That night, when we went to bed, it was different. There was no pretense, no ambiguity. He turned to me in the dark and pulled me into his arms, and his kiss was no longer hesitant or questioning. It was sure. It was a statement. This is where I belong. We fell asleep wrapped around each other, and this time, there was no anxiety, no frantic internal monologue on my part. There was only a profound sense of peace, a feeling of coming home. The new normal settled around us as gently as a morning fog. His duffel bag became a permanent fixture in the corner of my room. His toothbrush found a home in the holder next to mine. We didn't talk about labels or definitions. We didn't need to. Our commitment was spoken in the quiet, everyday actions. In the way he always made me the first cup of coffee in the morning, just how I liked it. In the way I knew to save him the corner piece of the lasagna. In the way we could sit in comfortable silence for hours, each doing our own thing, content just to be in the same space. The frantic energy of the beginning had mellowed into a deep, steady current. One Saturday morning, I woke up to find him propped up on one elbow, just watching me sleep. The early light was filtering through the blinds, striping the bed in gold and gray. He didn't say anything, just reached out and brushed a piece of hair off my forehead, his touch infinitely tender. "What?" I asked, my voice thick with sleep. He shook his head, a small, wondrous smile on his face. "Nothing," he whispered. "I was just thinking. All those nights, when I was holding on to you. I thought I was keeping myself from falling apart. But I think I was just holding on until I was brave enough to fall in the right direction. And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. The storm had passed, and we had found our harbor. Not in a physical place, but in each other. There are moments in your life that you replay in your mind until the edges soften, the colors fade, and they become a part of the mythology of you. The night he first held me, the terror and the tenderness of it, is one of those moments. But what I've come to realize is that the true miracle wasn't that he held me when I broke. The miracle is that he never let go. He held on through the confusion and the fear, through the difficult conversations and the uncertain new beginnings. He held on as we slowly, carefully, learned to build a new kind of life, one that wasn't part of any plan, but was more beautiful and more real than any blueprint could have ever imagined. We began to heal, not in the noise of grand declarations, but in the beautiful, honest silence we had learned, finally, to create together.